Welcome to the EXCELcast. I'm Jonathan Kuskiski, Assistant Director for the EXCEL program here at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And today I am talking with the Calidore String Quartet. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
It is great to have you back on campus. Of course you know them, grand prize winners of the inaugural M Prize back in May 2016. And now you're back for a series of visits to the school throughout the course of 2016 and 17. And as part of these visits, we're pleased to do this EXCELcast with you, talking about sort of building a career as a premier chamber ensemble. And so one of the I figured we should just go ahead and kick off with this experience you've had at M Prize. I'd love to hear what it was like to be at M Prize, but what you've seen happen in your careers, or the impact of that experience in these first 6 months, since you won the grand prize. What was it like?
Well, the experience was, we didn't actually see ourselves going back into the competition ring. We had done 7 competitions before that, and we thought we had closed that chapter of our part of our life, but then the M Prize was announced, and it seemed like an opportunity we really couldn't pass up, and it was really career-changing in a lot of ways that we didn't expect. Of course, the money was a huge incentive to apply to the competition. But the coverage that resulted from winning the competition is, you couldn't pay for that kind of publicity. It was really incredible how it got covered. And it introduced us to a lot of the series that are partnered with the with the M Prize, but then that also led to a very widespread effect of many people hearing about us. And as an ensemble, you kind of work your way up the ladder in terms of prestige of the series that you play on, but this allowed us kind of a shortcut into a lot of very major series that would have taken a lot longer to get to, because of the acclaim of winning the M Prize.
Great. I imagine also that just getting to meet and connect and play for the judges and the jury was probably a good thing, good opportunity. And I'm just wondering too. So, thinking about, obviously we could have this conversation again in a couple of years, and that would be interesting to see, because in many cases some of these series take years to even get on the list. So hopefully leapfrogging creates some more acceleration there. But what was it like so you had this many previous experiences in competitions, and obviously having seen you perform, you have honed those skills to play in competition. But what was it like preparing for the M Prize? Because you're already having a professional career from 2014 until this year. You were in residence at Stony Brook University, and I imagine about a year ago is when you found out you were going to be competing in M Prize. So what was it like to prepare for it leading up to May, while you were balancing these other activities that you were already engaged in?
Well, I think we treated it as another really great concert opportunity / what turned into 2 or 3 after each round. To approach it in that way, where we wanted to present the best of ourselves, also present a variation and try to create something that gave you a sense of who we were and what we loved to do. So, I mean, I wouldn't say we altered too much of how we normally prepare ourselves, but that being said, we had done many competitions before, and that was just sort of what we were used to in terms of our work ethic, in terms of learning repertoire, performing repertoire, and honing in our interpretations of those pieces.
Yeah, great. So, so just going off that point, I think maybe I would imagine one of the differences in the experience of the M Prize versus preparing for a concert is that it's not only a competition, but you talk about this question of sort of who you are, presenting who you are. And in that context, it's particularly interesting because you have all sorts of different types of ensembles who are all presenting themselves in a unique format in a competition like that really hasn't existed before. And so how do you think about that? I mean, you've made this very intentional choice as a string quartet to become an ensemble of this type of the highest caliber. And I think in some ways there are particular challenges to that. Right? Because you may be measured, even if people inextricably link your name to the first M Prize as a string quartet, they may be also, when you record something, comparing it to 10 other versions of that they already love. So what do you think about when you're talking about honing your identity in this sort of this ensemble format that has been around for so long? And there's so many prominent groups in that space.
In general, not in context of the M Prize?
Yes, in general, I would say.
Okay,
Yeah.
in general.
I would say the most important thing regarding that topic is to really look into yourself individually and look into yourself as a group and know what you are extremely passionate about.
Yeah.
There are many groups out in the country and the world right now that are fulfilling sort of niche market roles, and that's great as long as all of those groups are incredibly passionate about whatever niche they're filling. There can be a bit of a push at times to pigeonhole oneself into a certain corner of the market in order to gain reputation. I think, as I just alluded to, that's incredibly successful when that is your great passion. I think from the beginning of our group, we felt, first and foremost, really passionate about the great standards of the classic string quartet repertoire, and that's where we began, especially when we began on our competition journey with usually required repertoire rounds and competitions, which might include a Mendelssohn, a Beethoven, a Schubert quartet, things like that. And ever since then, I think what we're passionate about as a string quartet is to be as well-rounded as possible, to be able to bring what we perceive as our musical identity to music written in the 1600s, as well as music that was written yesterday. And to be able to just really enjoy the breadth of such a wide and wonderful genre, and hopefully help carry the genre forward into new music.
So that's great, and obviously you spoke already about this idea of bringing this authentic core of your identity with you to Emprise, irrespective of what other groups are playing. I think that's great advice for any ensemble, right?
Mhm.
Rather than bending towards short-term kinds of things, you have to really emphasize, and I think your performances bore that out for sure at the Emprise. So passionate about the kind of core repertoire, but should be well noted, when you perform with UMS, you're going to be doing a new piece by Carolyn Shaw. So certainly, you don't just play music of the 19th century or anything like that. But thinking about your life as a touring group, how does that passion inform the choices that you make in terms of repertoire? Do you all have brainstorming meetings where you talk about repertoire that you're going to program? How do you think about that element of your work?
Well, we do brainstorm in that we have major pieces every season that we want to tackle, and in thinking on a very broad scale. Like, for instance, we've just done all the Mendelssohn quartets, and that was very intentional that we built up that repertoire even a little bit quicker than we expected, but because sometimes that's what's demanded of the career. If somebody says, do you want to play the whole cycle of Mendelssohn quartets in a year, you say yes, you don't say no, and you figure out how to make it work. That's another thing about our quartet, is that we always say yes to everything. We never turn down an opportunity. No matter how crazy it might make our lives, we still find a way to make it work. But we start each season by saying, okay, right now we're trying to put together the whole Beethoven cycle. So every year we put together, 3 or 4 Beethovens, and then we see what other major pieces we want to play, and then based on that, we try to formulate programs that are tied together by a theme. So the audience is not just hearing 3 great pieces of music, and they come away having had an experience. That this year we are exploring the early Romantic composers who tackled the string quartet genre in the wake of Beethoven and his titanic 16 string quartets. I mean, how did composers work up the courage to tackle this genre that had been so mastered by this man, and how did they make it their own? So it's a program of Beethoven's Last Quartet paired with quartets by Schumann and Mendelssohn, who along with Schubert were the very first ones to, and they contributed very significant works to the genre that stand up against Beethoven's.
So how do you juggle learning that kind of a massive program or series of programs in the midst of touring? I mean, how do you manage? I'm curious, sort of on the day-to-day basis, when you're in the midst of a tour right now, right? A couple of weeks or so.
Yeah.
So do you rehearse on the road? Do you find time to practice individually? I imagine the answers to those questions are yes. But how do you do that? I mean, what's your system and what's your approach?
I mean, first and foremost is planning. Before the fall season starts, we sit down and talk about when we're going to start pieces. Okay, this is the day we're going to start, and we plan it out for the next 12 months, of the full year. So we know exactly when we have to have our parts ready individually, so that we can put things together really quickly. And then just from that, you figure out, okay, I'm traveling for these 2 weeks. I'm not going to have time to look at this part or this part. So I'm going to look at that piece the week before, or I have this pocket of time tomorrow, so I'm going to learn that piece then. You just get to to be able to plan out things really quickly and efficiently.
And assuming on the road that you won't have any of the time that you hope
Yeah.
for, which
Mhm.
goes back to planning it. Just to assume, okay, I'm not going to have time to work on that piece tomorrow, the day of the concert, so I'm gonna get ahead, I'm gonna practice all of the spots that might sneak up and bite me in the concert the day before, the week before, the month before, and then if you have an hour of time the morning of the concert, that's awesome. You take that, you jump on it, you practice as much as you can, but you never know when you're gonna be traveling, you never know when the schedule might change, when there might be a weird hiccup with checking into a hotel. I mean, there's so many countless things that can make time disappear very quickly that
Mhm.
you just assume that it's not gonna be there.
And even taking, like yesterday, we traveled from New York City to Detroit and checked into we're staying at an Airbnb, and we could have rehearsed, we have to rehearse because we're preparing this Caroline Shaw piece that we're going to play in February. We're premiering it on Sunday in Orange County, California, and we had to rehearse the piece because it's becoming crunch time, and instead of just rehearsing right away when we got there and getting it out of the way, we deliberately took an hour or two to have individual time to prepare our
Wow.
parts after we got off the plane, and then that kind of facilitates the rehearsal process when we all four come
So
together.
in other words, thinking ahead not just for the rehearsals, but thinking individually what you all need to bring to the table when you know you're going to have sort of a crunch time situation allows you to optimize those critical minutes for rehearsal that you squeeze in when you're in different places.
Individual is paramount. We actually, in the past 3 years, have really put individual preparation above group rehearsal or on the same level, and that's made a huge difference.
So are you all based in the same area now? So do you rehearse regularly? Is that part of your
Almost every day.
almost every day?
Like 6 days a week, but usually 7.
You know, what's interesting about this is I've had many conversations with other chamber ensembles who are scattered, you know, and they follow the same approach. And they're maybe out of necessity to a degree, right? Because they know they're only going to have a small amount of time together. But it's very interesting to hear you talk about that same kind of approach. And I think it makes a lot of sense because then you're able to not just maximize the time in terms of you're more prepared, generally speaking, but the conversations you probably have go right to the heart of the ensemble
Exactly.
conversation, right?
About the music.
Yeah.
We try to keep our rehearsals as much about the interpretation and minimize technical things like intonation and rhythm, and everything can be taken care of for the most part individually.
I see. Great. So what about so figured it out. You've got a great system for rehearsing and keeping your chops and your sort of ensemble cohesiveness together, even while touring. What about the other pieces that go into managing your career at this stage? So you have management, which is a wonderful thing, I imagine. But what are the other pieces that you still have to juggle and manage? What pieces are on your plate, so to speak, that go beyond everything? So break that down for us. Like, what do you budget out administrative time on a regular basis? Have you delineated different roles for different members of the quartet? How does that work?
Well, we do divvy up the roles. One of the major things that we have to deal with is again, planning travel, so figuring out how to get places, because such a huge part of what we do is travel. We don't spend that much time in our apartments in New York City. So that in itself often requires almost every day checking flights and figuring out, Jeff is really great at that. He's our travel guy.
We've gotten all of our concerts.
Do you get to keep the points? That's what I want to know. That can be useful.
Oh, we all spread it. We've
We've
got our silver medallion, almost gold medallions.
Great.
And Delta.
Good for you, Delta. Okay.
And Ryan's in charge of communications between our
Club
managers
managers,
and
Okay.
his managers.
And basically, even if you have a manager, and the managers will say this to you, this is not the day and age where a manager can just call up all the presenters and say, here, take them, you, the artist, really have to make your career and make yourself, that, what's the word for it? Like, people want to hire you, like, very,
Accessible.
where people want to buy you.
Uh-oh.
Sorry,
Marketable.
Marketable. Thank you. Oh gosh, sorry, it's after lunch. Yes, very, very marketable. So of course, things like the competitions that you do, the repertoire that you program. There's always constant brainstorming about how can we seem more attractive, but yet stay true to ourselves.
So that's the key. So I was going to ask the question of, in this day and age where even with management, there's
Yeah.
increasing responsibility on the artist to think about things like your programming, your identity, your schedule, all those kinds of things, right?
Yes,
That must
true.
be part of what you consider on a regular basis. So then the question that follows is what are the advantages or benefits of having the management there? And it seems to me that one of the things you've alluded to here is that they're a sounding board, but also a gateway, a way of framing what you do. They're an external force that can help frame what you do to these key
Exactly. Yeah.
presenters and other
Yeah.
external booking
I mean,
entities.
what the word you just used is key, and I think they are kind of a key to these doors that we couldn't open before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They provide these opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise.
Right.
The music world, essentially, more than anything, is just a series of networks and a series of relationships between people, between entities, between associations. So if you don't have a manager, the key to success is just making as many networks, as many relationships with as many different people between the group and everyone, musicians, administrations. And what helps maybe as much as anything about having a really well-connected manager is there are many pre-existing relationships between management agencies and concert presenters.
Right.
So there are many concert presenters that the first call at the beginning of their season is they call Opus 3, they call IMG, they call whoever they work with the most is, hey, I've got 4 slots this year. Do you have any really exciting artists that I might be interested in? And a lot of the bookings come that way, even not necessarily all from the management agency picking up the phone and cold calling a bunch of people that they don't know or that they haven't talked to in 10 years. So that's already right there a big boost, adding essentially, so you have your own series of networks, and let's just make up a number that we know 200 people in the music world, then all of a sudden we tie that to the management agency and maybe they have 600 hypothetical connections like that. All of a sudden you've branched open your network.
Right. It's exponential growth potentially,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
But just as you have your favorite artist that you like to listen to, especially in chamber music, presenters are it's a very niche market, chamber music, and people are very particular about what they like. We've sat at dinners with some presenters where they go through every quartet, who they like, what they play, and who they don't like, and all the things that. And so more often than not, people are going to hire you because your work is something that they admire. It could come through a connection, but more often than not, it's because they heard what you do and they liked it. So, even if you don't have, we're very fortunate to have a great management, and also, there's this whole component that we're learning about now. We are basically the only full-time classical string quartet on the roster of Opus 3, which is a huge management agency, and it's actually afforded us a lot of opportunities to be the only one, because then it's not being spread across, opportunities are not being, for string quartet, not being spread across a bunch of groups. So there's all these different elements that you don't think about when you first sign with a manager that...
And that the artist has so much, actually more control, even though we're talking about how great it is to have a management agency, just the fact that the internet exists now, that we have a bunch of videos on YouTube, so Opus 3 might contact a presenter, say, oh, we've got this really great, exciting quartet, the Calidore String Quartet, and the presenter says, oh, I watched all their videos on YouTube, they're awful. So we have the ability to put all of these videos that and essentially we're representing ourselves directly to the presenter. Social media, having Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of these direct connections to the presenter that actually do cut straight and circumvent the management agency does, from a public relations standpoint, give us as artists a lot more power of our own career. And it's not just this extra thing, it's that we have to capitalize on that because everyone else is doing it too. It's a very saturated market. That becomes part of our job as the artist, and no one else can really effectively do that for us without all of those individual components losing our personality and becoming disinteresting to whoever would be reading. So
and we do have specific goals for our career about certain series we want to play on. And that's actually one thing that we've learned. It's not about the amount of concerts you play on, it's about the profile of the concerts that you play, because where you play is kind of how you're perceived by the public. So like if you played at Carnegie Hall, like for instance, actually my former teacher, she rented out Carnegie. This is like in the '60s. She rented out Carnegie Hall for a recital, and she had applied for a teaching position at this university before, and they dismissed her application. Then she wrote that she played at Carnegie Hall, and suddenly their perception of her totally changed, and they hired her on the spot. And I mean, that's not always the case, but you know, these halls and these series do carry a certain amount of weight with people, and the more, you know, if you read that a quartet has, or a group has played at, you know, Wigmore Hall, Lincoln Center, all these places, then you think that they're probably pretty good, even if you haven't heard them. So that's something that we're always, you know, thinking about and aiming for, is how can we get there, and you know, what is going to make the difference to get to that point.
So I want to. That's great. I want to take a step back to think about your origins. So you played together 6 years. 6 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to sort of the early stages where you're all playing together in this group, and you know, I imagine that, you know, you found this, you know, cohesiveness pretty early on then, right? There must have been something that you started with, this passion that you shared for this music, and the sort of communication that you felt was really positive and intense and felt like the right thing to keep going on, right? So what are some examples, really briefly, about, you know, an opportunity that occurred early on for you, or maybe a challenge that you faced early on, that before you had all this knowledge that you've gained over the last 6 years, and management and all these this perception of the professional world, you know, I'm thinking for our audience of students, that would be really helpful for them to hear. So what would be an example of something that you experienced early on when you were playing together that challenged you in this way, or that maybe was an example of you moving towards what you just spoke about, Ryan, this idea of wanting to get to a certain spot? Did you have certain goals, and you know, what were you thinking about?
Well, one thing that stands out in my mind when you in reference to that is that we knew about Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center and how they have this mentorship program for young ensembles, and looking at the roster of the quartets that had been there, we knew that, and we also knew that David Finkel and Wu Han are big champions of young artists, and that they're always looking for young artists. So we decided to apply for their festival in the summer, Music at Menlo, to be students there, and we actually weren't accepted because they didn't take the quartet that summer because it didn't work out with the programming. And but it gave them a chance to hear us, and David said to us, you know, anytime you're in New York, just write to me, and I'd love to, you know, hear you. And so of course we followed up with him on that, and at that time we were looking for, we were leaving Colburn, and we were looking for a new place, and so we went to New York to play for David, actually in between auditions at 2 different schools. And about a day later, we got a call from Stony Brook University out of the blue saying, I'm the dean of Stony Brook, and I'm looking to have a quartet come here and be mentored by the Emersons and also teach. And we were like, wow, that's exactly what we're looking for. He's like, David Finkel gave me your name. He highly recommended you for this. And yeah, and then eventually we auditioned for CMS, and that all ended up working out, but that all came because our goal was CMS, and then these other things kind of happened. You know, we could have never expected that Stony Brook would have worked out that way. But that was one. But in regards to the other part of your question.
From the beginning of the quartet, I think we started as students at the Colburn School in Los Angeles, and we were playing together for a chamber music credit at school. And the school had given, Jeff and Estelle had been playing in a quartet the year before I joined, and the school had offered them a concert out in Santa Monica the next year, and I joined sort of mid-process. So we had a goal to prepare for, but more than anything else, I think we just had a lot of fun playing chamber music. We got along really well, and that's more important at the beginning than I think playing really well together, because that comes with experience. But if you don't get along at the beginning, alarm bells should be going off. So it organically developed from there. I don't think before we did our first competition we had a sit-down meeting that was like, guys, we have to be like a famous string quartet someday. That's a goal. We're driving towards that. It was something that came later, and it was something that I think we all slowly sort of ended up at the same time mentally. And after we did well in our first competition, which was the fish-off competition, I think that woke us up a little bit to career goals. It was like, whoa, wait, we had no idea that we would even do well in a competition, let alone get first prize in something. Like, is this something we should really, go all into? Is this something we should, really, really strive to have be our primary career together? And from there, I think it became more of a professional dedication on all.
Well, we put it as our top priority because I joined right after that, and we all said, we sat down. I remember the talk very clearly. We all sat down and we said, we all want well, you guys said to me, the three of us want to make this our top priority. Like, would you like to join? I was like, yeah, I would, yeah.
And then at that point came the first steps of career development, and we quickly realized we had absolutely no clue what we were doing. Because it's sort of the trial by fire thing of, oh my goodness, we're small business owners right now, and what the heck does that mean? So we had won a competition, so we had, for the first time, some degree of public credibility. So a couple people out there had heard of us, which was new. So occasionally we would get an email from somebody. It would be, I heard you at this competition. You guys sounded great. I'd love to have you at our series next year. What's your concert fee? And we're looking at each other like, what do we say?
People are gonna pay us?
Oh my God, it's $1 million. And,
No.
and that for us was, you say the right thing, you say the wrong thing, some things work out. And we realized really quickly that get help. If you don't know what the right answer is, find people that know the right answer. Ryan was talking about David Finkel. Anybody who is really experienced in the field. There is a woman named Laura Leopins who sort of heads the whole career development, marketing, like student promotion thing at the Colburn School, and she was really instrumental in our careers advancement. But we realized really quickly by making mistakes, like, find people that can help and don't be shy. Ask as many questions as possible.
It's true. Your teachers, everybody has experience in the industry, that you can never, even imagine as a student, and it's just very important.
It's great, and I love the fact that you talk about this, especially to the student audience here, because I think it's much harder to find that help sometimes if you haven't taken advantage of it while you're a student. And so many of the groups that I've spoken with and professionals I've spoken with, these experiences or these career developments originated back when they were students. And so I love the fact that you're encouraging that. I'm a little biased, but I would encourage students to also think about that in any way, because the risk that's inherent in testing something out when you're a student is much more minimal, right? If you have a sense of what your fee might be, even for a smaller gig, it might help you when you get that, because it could happen at any time, irrespective of a competition win, right?
Yes,
And we were fortunate that we went through a lot of these career trial things when we still had the support network of a great school. When if some things didn't work out, or if we shot ourselves in the foot with something, we still have an umbrella that's supporting us. And just to encourage everybody out there to really, when you are still technically students, you've probably been playing an instrument for 10, 15 years at least, if not longer, so you should be seeing yourself as a professional. And just whatever you're trying to do, get a head start on it before you're, out on your own, paying for rent, doing whatever with all of expenses, paying for health insurance, get a head start on whatever you're striving for before it gets harder.
Jeremy brings up a really good point about networks. Always, even after you left a place, make sure you maintain a relationship with those people who were important to you there, because they can continue to help you. Even if you went to a summer festival, we still regularly write to all the summer festivals that we went to, just updating them on how we're doing, and every time we're in the area, we stop by to see, because as many networks as you can have as support, the farther you're going to get, because it's so hard just to do it on your own. And so if I think about all the different webs we're attached to, it's constantly increasing as we go through the years, and all the hosts that you stay with, you never know how they're going to come back to help you, or just like to see a friend after a concert is a really nice thing after you've been on the road, to have a meal with maybe somebody at least you've met once before.
Right. Well, I imagine that's also more possible when you've built positive relationships, and especially when I appreciate the fact that you brought up this idea that of course people want to work with people that they like, but ultimately when they're thinking about booking someone for a performance, they also, that has to be coupled with the quality and the excellence of the artistic output itself. And I think that comes from that original point you started with, which drove your group, which was passion, finding your passion. And I can say, having seen you play, that certainly comes through in your playing. And it's so great to have you here back on campus. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And this is the first of several visits, so we look forward to having you back when you perform with UMS and continue to work with our students.
Thank you very much.